very knowledgeable about the Bible. So
Okay,
don't be rude.
All right, Job. Job with no E. Job 18. Job 18 really isn't much changing going on here from what we've been talking about the last few weeks.
No one's listened to you yet.
Huh?
No one's listening.
Oh, no one's listening? Well,
Well,
Lee just told me nobody was listening. I'm just going to start talking. Anyway. Well, Terry, that's all right, Terry.
he was one of the
Oh,
ones
really?
that were talking.
On my lands. I guess. We're gonna wait for Cynthia to get her check wrote out, and then we'll start. Anyway, I hope he heard it. He's right next to you. Well, anyhow.
Oh. There you go. Pound that hammer.
Oh, shoot. There you go. Yeah, so Job 18, again, it's the same narrative that we've been reading about for the last few weeks, where Job's friends will confront him and he'll protest against them. So we're not going to cover any new territory except for a key phrase that Job has in chapter 19 that we'll elaborate on. And from that phrase in chapter 19, Job's attitude for the rest of the book changes. And we will see that played out as we go through. But chapter 18 is now Job's third friend, Bildad. His second friend. If we were to rank them, I guess we would say the second, Bildad. This is Bildad's second reply to Job. It seems like his three friends here are taking turns in confronting Job, and so it's Bildad's turn. And we will see later on in a few weeks when we get to it, we'll see a fourth friend show up that decides to unload on him. So let's try not to have friends like Job. But we'll get that when we get there. But there are four friends that we'll have, but these three are the ones that stayed with him the longest. So anyway, in chapter 18, we've got Bildad here, and again, he's the second of the three, and this is his second, what they call the second speech, or his second reply to Job. So that's chapter 18, and he's essentially going to, again, elaborate on their opinion that Job is a sinful man, wicked man, and that God is doing this to him because of his wickedness. So it's the same scenario played out now will be the fifth time. And Job kind of gives it to him like he did last week when he told Eliphaz there that you guys are miserable comforters and physicians without strength. And so we'll see Job replying back to Bildad in kind of the same manner. But I'm jumping ahead now. So anyway, that being said, we'll start chapter 18, and we'll go through that. Ought to go pretty quickly here. Chapter 18.
Job 18. Then answered Bildad the Shuhite, and said, How long will it be ere ye make an end of words? Mark, and afterwards we will speak. Wherefore are we counted as beasts, and reputed vile in your sight? He teareth himself in his anger. Shall the earth be forsaken for thee, and shall the rock be removed out of his place? Yea, the light of the wicked shall be put out, and the spark of his fire shall not shine. The light shall be dark in his tabernacle, and his candle shall be put out with him.
So Bildad is telling Job once again, your end is near because you're wicked. Notice what he says in verse 2. How long are you going to make ends of your words? Well, you just going to keep talking? Now, I come across something today. It's funny, just today, after studying this all week, but I read another thing. And Kay had mentioned a few weeks ago how it seemed like Job just did a lot of talking for as miserable as he was. But John Trapp, who was a Puritan writer back in the day, he said, perhaps the devil purposely did not affect Job's mouth so that Job would be able to curse God. So I never thought of that, but that kind of hit home to think that, Satan's plan for Job was for him to curse God. And if you remember back in chapter, 2 or 4, I don't remember exactly. I think it was chapter 2, his wife said to curse God and die. And, we do have him talking a lot, as we've read throughout the chapters, the amount of talking that Job does for as miserable he is. So this really kind of stuck out to me this morning when I read that perhaps that was seemingly the only thing that was unaffected by the devil's affliction on Job was his mouth. So you think about that. Perhaps that is a reason why, but just something to think about. But he says in verse 4, he tears himself in his anger, talking about Job is tearing himself in his anger. But if you may not remember, but if you go to Job 16:9, Job believes that it's God that is tearing him and hates him, and it is God that is gnashing upon him with his teeth. But here Bildad's saying, no, Job, that's you. You're tearing yourself up because, again, in their eyes, you're a wicked man, and you're suffering all this because of your wickedness. So Bildad's replying back to what Job had mentioned about God in chapter 16. The light of the wicked shall be put out. Your end is coming, Job. And the light of his tabernacle, or the lights in his house, are going to be going out because no one will live there once he dies. Verse 7.
The steps of his strength shall be straitened, and his own counsel shall cast him down. For he is cast into a net by his own feet, and he walketh upon a snare. The gin shall take him by the heel, and the robber shall prevail against him. The snare is laid for him in the ground, and a trap for him in the way.
So because you're wicked, Job, all these traps are set out for you, and you're just walking precariously through the wilderness, so to speak, waiting for one of these traps to get you. Now, that would be terrifying. I've read and watched videos of some of the Vietnam veterans talk about the traps that the Vietnamese set up for them and how scary that it was when they walked through these, the jungle, I guess. What?
Rice fields.
Yeah, the fields and all of these hidden booby traps that they had. But so you can imagine that terror. And then here, Bildad's saying that that's how you're walking, figuratively speaking, because absolutely, Job isn't going anywhere because he's sick. But figuratively, your life is trying to avoid all these snares that God has laid for you so you don't get trapped in your own wickedness. And verse 11 follows that, and it says, terror. Well, we didn't read it yet, but terror shall make him afraid on every side. If you believe that there's booby traps in your path, you're going to be afraid everywhere you step. And that's what Bildad is getting at here. Again, all with the assumption that Job is going through this because he is wicked. And I reiterate that every week because I want us to understand that chapters 1 and 2, God said that Job was a righteous man. So we see all this, and Bildad, under the assumption of his wickedness, or Job's wickedness, thinks that God's going to get you, or maybe the devil's going to get you, either way, however you want to see that. But we know that's not the case in Job's defense, which, again, I think chapter 19, we're going to see a different side of Job here and once we get through chapter 18. Verse 11.
Terror shall make him afraid on every side, and shall drive him to his feet. His strength shall be hunger bitten, and destruction shall be ready at his side. It shall devour the strength of his skin, even the firstborn of death shall devour his strength. His confidence shall be rooted out of his tabernacle, and it shall bring him to the king of terrors. It shall dwell in his tabernacle, because it is none of his. Brimstone shall be scattered upon his habitation. His roots shall be dried up beneath, and above shall his branch be cut off. His remembrance shall perish from the earth, and he shall have no name in the street.
What a fine friend Bildad is here. When you die, you're going to be completely forgotten about, Job. You're not going to be mentioned. You're going to be dried up like a root. You're going to be scattered. Your house and your homestead is going to be nothing but brimstone, and that's a term for sulfur. It's just going to be desolate. No one's going to come around. No one's going to remember. All because of your wickedness, Job. And again, some friend here. Your remembrance shall perish from the earth. Now, we know that's not true because we have a whole book. Well, we have a whole book of Scripture written about all this that Job faced. So we know that Bildad didn't know what he was talking about when he said there in verse 17 that his remembrance will vanish from the earth or perish from the earth. Just somehow. verse 18, I think. Yeah.
He shall be driven from light into darkness, and chased out of the world. He shall neither have son nor nephew among his people, nor any remaining in his dwellings. They that come after him shall be astonied at his day, as they that went before were affrighted. Surely such are the dwellings of the wicked, and this is the place of him that knoweth not God.
So that closing verse tells us that Bildad had no inkling that Job knew God. Because look at what's happened to you, Job. Surely they that are the such dwelling of the wicked, and is the place of him that knows not God. You are suffering, Job, because you don't even know God. You've told us all along you do, but it's evident you can't or you don't know God, because look at how you're covered. Look at how you are. Which, again, I remind us, God said Job was righteous. So God knew Job. I want us to go back. You don't have to turn there, but I'm going to read something here in chapter 1, all the way back to when we first began that. And God says in verse 8 to Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? God knew Job by name. And God knew, it says there, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that fears God and escheweth evil. God knew Job's name, and God knew that Job was righteous. And according to God here, he was perfect and upright, and there was none like him in the earth. So we can take all the opinions of all of Job's friends and throw them out the window because of what we know God said in Job chapter 1, verse 8. God knew Job by name. He called him by name. And here we see Bildad in chapter 18, the last, you don't even know God. Well, God knew Job. Anyway, comments or questions on any of that? I did write down, it seems that they were kind of all getting tired of hearing each other talk. That's kind of their attitudes toward each other at this time. We're kind of, Bildad and the rest are tired of hearing Job's replies, and Job's tired of hearing them guys talk, which we'll see here laid out again in chapter 19.
This one seems the harshest of all of them.
Yeah.
The final, I'm really
Gonna nail it to him. Yeah.
So I think it's Satan's attempt to really,
Yeah.
dig at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Put it in and twist the knife, so to speak. But again, as we go through chapter 19, we are going to see a change in Job. We have seen in the chapters past how Job at times does blame God or does cry out thinking that God has forsaken him or that God has left him. But from chapter 19, especially the latter part of the chapter onward, we do not see Job in having that same feeling toward God. And I think what takes place in chapter 19 gets Job to understand that he does belong to God and that God is his only strength and God is there for him, which, again, I think we'll see played out in the remainder of the book, but we'll see it change here in chapter 19. So with that, we'll go to chapter 19. All right. Yeah, here we go. Whoop. Oh, shoot. Hold on. Wrong button. There we go.
Job 19. Then Job answered and said, how long will ye vex my soul, and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times have ye reproached me. Ye are not ashamed that ye make yourselves strange to me? And be it indeed that I have erred, mine error remaineth with myself. If indeed ye will magnify yourselves against me, and plead against me my reproach, know now that God hath overthrown me, and hath compassed me with his net. Behold, I cry out of wrong, but I am not heard. I cry aloud, but there is no judgment. He hath fenced up my way that I cannot pass, and he hath set darkness in my paths.
So we see here Job is now feeling like he's been abandoned by God. But in a few verses, we're going to see how he realizes God's his only strength. So we got the full range of emotion from Job. Not only is he got his friends there accusing him, but he also feels like he's been abandoned by his friends. But there are times, and we've seen that played out in previous chapters, how he feels he's been abandoned by God. But again, there has been times throughout the previous chapters where in one verse he feels abandoned by God, and then the next verse or two he's crying out to the Lord as his only hope. And we will see that same scenario played out here in chapter 19. But here he does feel like he's been abandoned. God's overthrown me. He's compassed me with his net. He's got me trapped. Kind of like what Bildad was referring to in chapter 18, verses whatever, I just say from 8 to 12, roughly, talking about all these traps and snares that God has put out. And so in that case, Job perhaps is believing his friend. I cry out of no wrong. I didn't do anything wrong, but I'm crying out, but I'm not heard. But hold on to that thought, because Job knows that he's being heard, as we will see later. Verse 9, yes.
He hath stripped me of my glory and taken the crown from my head.
Understand, yes, God has taken away Job's glory and the crown from his head in an earthly sense, but not in a spiritual or heavenly sense. But Job, because he's lost everything, God has stripped me down. I'm naked, essentially. But understand, in the heavenly sense, Job has been elevated. And here we are some 5,000 years later talking about Job. So understand that when Job is saying that, he is talking perhaps out of desperation, but also understand that he's talking about in a worldly or earthly sense. And again, for us that are saved, God could strip us down and take away our glory on earth, only to raise us and make us even more glorious when we get to heaven. We don't know what God's purposes are in some ways for us. And so I think we all get guilty of being earthly minded. And I think perhaps maybe sometimes God does have to humble us to get us to be heavenly minded. So something to think about there in what Job has said there. Verse 10.
Destroyed me on every side, and I am gone, and mine hope hath he removed like a tree. He hath also kindled his wrath against me, and he counteth me unto him as one of his enemies. His troops come together, and raise up their way against me, and encamp round about my tabernacle. He hath put my brethren far from me, and mine acquaintance are verily estranged from me. My kinsfolk have failed, and my familiar friends have forgotten me. They that dwell in mine house and my maids count me for a stranger. I am an alien in their sight. I called my servant, and he gave me no answer. I entreated him with my mouth. My breath is strange to my wife, though I entreated for the children's sake of mine own body. Yea, young children despised me. I arose, and they spake against me. All my inward friends abhorred me, and they whom I loved are turned against me.
Now we see Job feels isolated, not only from God, but now from all the people that he's known. His friends have betrayed him. His family is gone. His wife is left. Even my servant won't answer my call. Kind of like trying to tell a 5-year-old what to do, you know. But my servant doesn't even listen anymore. Everything is gone from me. And again, we remember that Job's children were all killed. And perhaps the mention of the children there in verse 17 perhaps could be talking about his nieces or nephews. One commentator did perhaps believe that Job had maybe some young children that didn't die in the calamity of chapter 1, but I think that was a stretch, and that perhaps this was his the children of his brothers and sisters, so to speak. But even they're gone. The young children despised me, kind of like how I feel with the grandkids sometimes. We all need to try to get Hadley to get her tooth pulled today. You know, she keeps wiggling that tooth. I offered many suggestions, but she didn't like any of them. She likes wiggling it. Tammy told her she could stick a straw in it after she pulls the tooth out. So, anyway. My inward friends abhorred me. You know, these three of his closest buddies, they hate him, essentially. They've done nothing but talk bad about him since they showed up on the scene. He's been abandoned. Yeah, I think so. But as Daniel, I think, mentioned last week, perhaps in some way they were beneficiaries of his riches in some way. And perhaps they're jealous or mad about him losing his. Yeah, so they're all suffering, perhaps, in a way. We don't know that, but that was a good thought there. But all my inward friends abhor me, and they whom I loved are turned against me. Social isolation. He's on his own, and he feels like God's abandoning him. But hold on to that thought as we go to verse 20 and forward here.
My bone cleaveth to my skin and to my flesh, and I am escaped with the skin of my teeth.
Now, some commentators believe the skin of his teeth, he's referring to his gums. And that's the only thing that's not been affected is his mouth. And again, as I mentioned for chapter 18, that perhaps Satan didn't touch his mouth so that he would curse God. So, anyway.
Have pity upon me, O ye my friends, for the hand of God hath touched me. Why do ye persecute me as God, and are not satisfied with my flesh? Oh, that my words were now written. Oh, that they were printed in a book.
Looky there. Oh, that my words were written and printed in a book. Well, looky here, right here. Notice what else he says, verse 24.
That they were graven with an iron pen and lead in the rock forever.
Now, we don't have the stones that it was written on, but we got every one of us has got a copy of his book right here. Maybe if my words are written down, perhaps, he's thinking, people could learn from my calamity here. Notice what he says in verse 25.
For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth.
I know that my Redeemer liveth. Understand what he said last week maybe not last week, week before last in chapter 13. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him, but I will maintain my own ways before him. And then last week he said, last week in chapter 16, oh, that one might plead for a man with God as a man pleads for his neighbor, talking about Christ and being the mediator and being the advocate for him. Now he says, I know my Redeemer lives. Now again, in Job's day, perhaps they didn't know that it would be Jesus Christ, the true Son of God, because they didn't have the full canon of Scripture that we do. But he knew there would be somebody to advocate for him or to buy him or to pay his price, and that he would stand in the latter day upon the earth. Notice what he says in verse 26.
And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God.
He knows, too, in some unknown way, that he's going to be able, regardless of what the worms do to his flesh, he's going to stand before God and see him. Now, perhaps in some ways, Job doesn't know if he's going to be standing before God as righteous or wicked, although we know he was righteous, but he knows he's going to be able to see God, and perhaps in some ways plead his case before him, because he does have, according to verse 16, a mediator to stand before him, before God. I know my Redeemer lives. I know that if worms destroy this body, I will see God. Notice what he says in 27.
Whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me.
So there's Job's hope. Now, one commentator I read said that from this point forward, we don't see this despair in Job as we have previously. Now, to be quite frank, I've not read too much past, so I can't say that for certain. But I feel like if the fellow wrote a commentary, I forget who it was that I was reading, if he felt confident enough to write that and publish it, that it must be the case that from here on out, Job does not necessarily despair of the help of God. I do have a few things to read here, starting with about these verses. This is MacArthur. At the point of Job's greatest despair, his faith appeared at its highest as he confidently affirmed that God was his Redeemer. He wanted that confidence in the record for all to know. Job wished that the activities of his life were put into words and engraved in the rock, just like we read there in verse 24. so all would know that he had not sinned to the magnitude of his suffering. God granted his prayer and his request. God was his Redeemer who would vindicate him in that last day of judgment on the earth when justice is finally done. And Job had no hope left for this life, but was confident that after he was dead, his Redeemer would vindicate him in the glory of a physical resurrection in which he would enjoy perfect fellowship with the Redeemer. And that Jesus Christ is that Redeemer is the clear message of the gospel. And then I've got Adam Clarke describes how he felt this remarkable revelation given to Job changed him and gave him a different attitude that is evident in the rest of the book of Job. Okay, it was Adam Clarke. I didn't realize I had. Anyway, it is not at all probable that Job had this confidence any time before the moment in which he uttered it. It was then a direct revelation, nothing of which he had ever had before. Else he had never dropped those words of impatience and irritation which we find in several of his speeches. And this may be safely inferred from the consideration that after this time no such words escaped his lips. He bears the rest of his sufferings with great patience and fortitude, and seems to look forward with steady hope to that day in which all tears shall be wiped away from all faces, and it is fully proved that the judge of all the earth has done right. We could say that seeing Jesus changed Job and transformed him in the midst of his suffering. So, some words there to consider, that perhaps from this point, Job has his eyes open to realize that God not only is his only hope, but is his Redeemer and his advocate and his friend. And again, we'll see that, I think, played out throughout the rest of the book of Job. Go ahead, let's read verse 28 and 9.
But ye should say, Why persecute we him, seeing the root of the matter is found in me? Be ye afraid of the sword, for wrath bringeth the punishment of the sword, that ye may know there is a judgment.
All right. Comments or questions on 19? No? Are we as sure as Job that our Redeemer does live and that he will stand on the last day in judgment? I mean, Job was pretty certain of it, and I believe that because he is, so can we. We can understand that. And Job had a partial knowledge of what God could do and what he was doing. You know, we have full knowledge in knowing what the plan of salvation is and the redemption and the coming judgment. Job really knew of none of that, well, the way we know it. So we ought to be able to take comfort in the fact that God is our Redeemer and our advocate, as well as Judge of the earth. Anyway.
I think we know more than what maybe Job did.
Yeah.
So he went through all the different emotions. And we sometimes do that. He was questioning God, and it's okay to question.
Yeah.
But he never cursed, but I think there was times
He was close.
overtaken
Yeah.
with, oh, self-pity.
Yeah.
Woe's me.
Yeah.
Where in the New Testament it says, in all things give thanks.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get, oh, woe's me. And then we need to start thanking God for the blessings.
Yeah.
And looking at the positive things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how we come out at the other side.
Yeah.
And he had it a lot harder. because
Yeah. He didn't know all that.
constantly.
Yeah.
No, he didn't.
And
'Cause,
we-
everybody says, oh, God can take everything away from me, but boy, I'm going to stand firm. But
yeah.
are we, if everything is stripped from us?
Yeah.
We hope we can, and that's what happened to him. Everything was stripped.
Yeah.
He didn't have the scriptures that we
Right.
have. So
Yeah, and the hope that, yeah.
it ought to make us stronger.
Yeah. And we have the example of Job. I mean, Job didn't have anybody else to compare himself to. So, in some ways, we are very blessed to not only have the full of Scripture, but also the example of Job for us to understand that God is on our side if we belong to him. So, chapter 20, and we will be finished here. This is Zophar. This is Job's third friend. This is Zophar's second speech or second reply to Job. It's not hardly any different than the first however many replies or speeches we've had toward Job. I've 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be the 6th, I guess. This won't be any different than the previous 5, perhaps somewhat harsher than the previous ones. But nonetheless, it's basically all the same here. It's one thing for Job to be having all these physical ailments. It's quite another for his friends to completely abandon him, and his wife to completely just, we don't read any more of his wife. Maybe she was better because she just left, and didn't have to poke at him constantly. Well, we don't know whether because Job does have children again, so we don't know if it's with the wife that he had that was mentioned in chapter 2, or whether he was remarried. We don't know, but we do know he has children once again after all this is over.
Well, he talks about her in verse 17.
Oh.
My breath is strange to my wife.
Oh, yeah. Well, So, yeah, she may have just. Yeah, Scripture doesn't really ever mention what she does or where she went, but perhaps in some ways she did Job a favor by just leaving him alone. At least that. I mean, his 3 pals here, they just can't do help but poke at him every time they turn around. Yeah, well, it says that he went out to near the city, like we would call the city dump. That's where he's abiding, and we really don't know. Yeah.
And don't you think that the devil's influencing his friends as
Oh
well?
yeah.
I mean,
oh,
so
definitely.
They're trying to. He's trying to make them say the thing that
Yeah.
That's why it gets harsher, and that's why
Yeah.
you know.
We just want you to curse God.
Yeah.
And again, I go back to this comment that I came across. Perhaps that's why his mouth was able to work, so that he could curse God, but he never does. So, verse 1 of chapter 20. This is Zophar, some pal.
Job 20. Then answered Zophar the Naamathite, and said, Therefore do my thoughts cause me to answer, and for this I make haste. I have heard the check of my reproach, and the spirit of my understanding causeth me to answer. Knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed upon earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment? Though his excellency mount up to the heavens, and his head reach unto the clouds, yet he shall perish for ever like his own dung. They which have seen him shall say, Where is he?
So again, the same refrain here. You're just going to vanish. You're just going to perish and go away, and nobody's even going to remember you, Job. It's kind of the same thing that Bildad was saying chapter 18.
He shall fly away as a dream, and shall not be found. Yea, he shall be chased away as a vision of the night. The eye also which saw him shall see him no more. Neither shall his place any more behold him. His children shall seek to please the poor, and his hands shall restore their goods. His bones are full of the sin of his youth, which shall lie down with him in the dust. Though wickedness be sweet in his mouth, though he hide it under his tongue, though he spare it, and forsake it not, but keep it still within his mouth, yet his meat in his bowels is turned. It is the gall of asps within him. He hath swallowed down riches, and he shall vomit them up again. God shall cast them out of his belly. He shall suck the poison of asps. The viper's tongue shall slay him. He shall not see the rivers, the floods, the brooks of honey and butter. That which he labored for shall he restore, and shall not swallow it down. According to his substance shall the restitution be, and he shall not rejoice therein. Because he hath oppressed, and hath forsaken the poor, because he hath violently taken away an house which he builded not. Surely he shall not feel quietness in his belly. He shall not save of that which he desired. There shall none of his meat be left. Therefore shall no man look for his goods. In the fullness of his sufficiency he shall be in straits. Every hand of the wicked shall come upon him.
I meant to stop after verse 11, and then when I missed that, I had to go to 22. So, but notice what Zophar says here. It's basically the same thing in verses, say, 4 through 11. You're going to be gone. Your legacy is going to be gone. You're going to be forgotten. You're just going to vanish away like a dream. And then in 12 through 22, he said the sin and this lifestyle is poison to you. And even if you do get it all back, Job, there beginning in basically in verse 18, it's not going to be nearly as sweet to you as it was prior, because all the people that relied on you are going to be poor, and you can't restore them. So he says there, even if you were able to get all your blessings back, you're not going to be worth anything, Job. Some pal. Again, there's not been one word of kindness through any of this from his friends. And it just gets, like I think it was Cynthia's, it just gets harder and harder, or harsher. Yeah, harsher and harsher, not harder and harder. Harsher, easy for me to say, right? In their replies. And even if God restores you, it's not going to be the same, Job. You're not going to be able to, because you've forsaken the poor. Because of the sin in your life, Job, you've forsaken the poor and those that rely on you for their substance. Continuing now, verse 23.
When he is about to fill his belly, God shall cast the fury of his wrath upon him, and shall rain it upon him while he is eating.
So even once you get all this back, as you are just about ready to start enjoying your life again, God is going to come down and put a stop to it. What's it say there? Cast his fury. Cast the fury of his wrath upon you. Even while the steak is on your fork, God's going to come down and take it all away again. Some friend.
He shall flee from the iron weapon, and the bow of steel shall strike him through. It is drawn, and cometh out of the body, yea, the glittering sword cometh out of his gall, terrors are upon him. All darkness shall be hid in his secret places. A fire not blown shall consume him. It shall go ill with him that is left in his tabernacle. The heaven shall reveal his iniquity, and the earth shall rise up against him. The increase of his house shall depart, and his goods shall flow away in the day of his wrath. This is the portion of a wicked man from God, and the heritage appointed unto him by God.
Notice how they, like Zophar here, speaking on God's behalf, But again, even if God restores everything, you're not going to be able to enjoy it. He's going to end up taking it all away again anyway. And the heavens will then show the iniquity that you have in your life. So, again, not much different from the others, but other than being more harsh toward Job in their replies.